Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chaish, and today I want to compare two of the cameras that I believe are probably the best cameras for personal work, for travel. They are both incredibly well-functioning and generally more affordable than a lot of professional options, and that is the X100V and the X-E4. Now, if you've been on this channel, you've seen me do specific videos on both of these cameras, but I definitely wanted to do a video specifically talking about them, together and comparing the two, as I know that most people aren't probably going to own both. They're probably kind of trying to choose between one or the other. So I'll give you kind of like my take on both, as I've used both of them fairly extensively and shot lots of images in lots of different scenarios and spaces, and really gonna try to give you a good grasp of what might be best for you. The first thing that I always am going to be looking at when I'm considering buying anything is the price. So just to throw it out there right off the bat, the X-E4 comes in at $850 body only. The X100V comes in at $1399, but includes a built-in lens. So to get, something going on the X-E4, you are gonna have to buy some sort of lens or at least an adapter. So you can buy a cheap adapter and put some vintage lenses on there or something like that. But you are gonna have to spend a little bit beyond that $849 to get something going on this camera. That being said, even if you do love the 23mm focal length, which is the 35mm equivalent, you can actually purchase the 23 f2, slap it on the X-E4, and you're still gonna come out ahead in terms of money to the X100V, because just the price difference of buying both ends up being a little bit cheaper. Now, in saying that, you are also gonna be giving up a pretty decent size advantage that you get with the X100V, while the X-E4 body is smaller by a little bit than the X100V. Obviously, you're gonna have to add the lens, in which case you're adding a lot more, kind of like another axis of stuff sticking off your camera, which maybe if you are thinking about pocketing something or thinking about bag space or whatever, you're either gonna have to pack it like this and have the space to add this little extra stuff, or you're gonna have to pack it by taking the lens off and putting those things in separate pouches or whatever. So it is definitely one of the things to consider. But I will say, as someone that has carried these cameras around as like personal cameras, taking my kids on walks, just general stuff like that, they don't feel that different because they're both like incredibly lightweight cameras. And if you're planning on buying these f2 lenses, which are amazing and also fairly inexpensive, it kind of fits that bill. So you're basically just gonna have to decide on what kind of thing and what kind of packing in terms of that kind of stuff is kind of most useful for you. That being said, I talk about it a lot and people probably make fun of me in my Leica videos, but the 23mm, as my friend Tyler, whose lens I'm borrowing actually, mentioned, it doesn't pass the balance test. So if you put the lens on, it extends out far enough that the balance falls off. So you let go of it, it falls down. Not a big deal because you can use either the included lens hood or buy like a third-party hood like I've done here. So not the end of the world, but just as a heads up, it does fall down a little bit. Now, these cameras actually share the same sensor and the same autofocus. So in those terms, you are basically going to be getting the same camera, although the lenses are a little bit different. Now, in terms of actual function and how the cameras perform and feel in use, you'll definitely see one of the things that is the big downside to me of the X-E4, and that's the viewfinder. When you look at them, side by side, you can definitely tell that the X100V has a much, much larger viewfinder than the X-E4. In practical use, I didn't notice that it was an issue until I started using them kind of like next to each other. And then I went, oh, Yeah, I guess the X100V is much, much better. But again, it wasn't something, it was like one of those like you don't know what you don't have kind of thing. So if it's the only camera you have and you're not comparing them directly, it's totally fine and workable. The other thing that I'll mention in this general kind of back section is the ergonomics are a little bit different. They have buttons placed in different ways. I'm still confused at why they did it like this, because all they would have to do is move the play button down here, and then it would match up exactly with the X Pro 3 and the X100V in terms of those ergonomics. Not sure why they did that, but I do prefer having the same thing. So again, if you're just choosing between one or the other, doesn't really matter, but I thought I'd throw that out there. You're obviously missing this little control dial in the back, so the X-E4 definitely has a little bit less usability in that way, less customizable stuff. The X100V has their Q button, which is like one of their Q menus on the back, while the X-E4 has it on the top here. And then speaking of the top plate and those kind of features, they both obviously have a hot shoe. They both have a shutter speed dial, but then the ISO is built into the shutter speed dial on the X100V, which is great. And then there is no ISO setting on the top here. You have to use this custom function button, which I have gladly changed to ISO. It's not a big deal, but you just have to know that like your custom function button can't just be used for something else on here. You're most likely going to have to use it as ISO unless you're using it on some sort of auto thing. But as a personal camera, I just set these things to an auto ISO mode anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then coming around to the front, you'll see that they both have a control dial here, and then they have like a focus assist light of sorts. But that's kind of where the similarities end, unless you're just talking about just general styling. They have very similar styling, but the X100V also has a hybrid viewfinder, so you actually have, you know, some actual glass and stuff like that here to let you see through optically, where the X-E4 does not have that, which then means that the kind of viewfinder selector dial knob thing here doesn't exist on the X-E4 because you don't need it. But then again, you also have a button here that you're missing out on. So that's another custom function that you won't have on the X-E4 versus, you know, something that you can customize a little bit more on the X100V. Moving kind of to the side, the last little kind of button setup that you have here is the ability on the X100V to, with a little switch here, switch between your autofocus modes. So it has manual focus, continuous focus, and single shot kind of like focus. Where the Fujifilm X-E4, you have to find a button to either customize that to, or go into the menu to do that. So another one of those like little bummers, but just depending on how much stuff you personally have to customize, it has the custom buttons to do it. You just have to use one of them. The last thing about the front that I'll add is the X100V has a built-in flash, which isn't great, but it works for what it is, for like just general life stuff, going around and like taking photos at family events or whatever. If it's really dark, the flash works great and it's fine. It's really close to the lens in terms of actual placement. So you'll definitely want to use the red eye adjustment thing if you're indoors, because I didn't do that at first. And then all the photos have like mad red eye in them. But otherwise, you know, they both have hot shoes, so you can put an external flash on if you wanted to. But the X-E4 doesn't come with a flash. So that's another kind of add-on that you have to buy, even if you want the most simple of flash setups. And now the back here where the LCD screen is, they're both touch screens and they both seem like they're about the same size. The difference is, though, the X-E4 has a little extra feature that the X100V doesn't have. So the X100V allows you to kind of just pop it up like this. And then you can move it down slightly this way if you want to shoot from above, which is great. But then the X-E4 kind of expands upon that again, and allows you to move it back a little bit further, which then allows you to move this down a little bit further if you want to shoot from above. But then it also comes out even more and flips up to be a kind of like selfie screen of sorts. So that's great if you want to do some vlogging. Both of these cameras have actually really great video functions, although neither of them have in-body image stabilization. So if you want to do something like that, that's great. The only kind of issue is the place where you normally put a microphone is right here, and then the microphone would be blocking the screen. So not as useful as it could possibly be. So most likely you'd have to, rig up some sort of thing to put the microphone on the side or something else. But it's definitely a possibility and would still make a really good little run and gun vlog setup if you wanted to rig it out. So really similar screens and everything like that in that way, but the X-E4 actually kind of gives you a little extra functionality there. Speaking of those video terms, although they have the same sensor and I believe the same processor and the same autofocus and everything like that, the X-E4 has the ability to be used as a webcam currently, and maybe the X100V will come with that in a firmware update, but I would really like to use it as a webcam of sorts in the future, either for live streams or, just general stuff. I'm the kind of person that has lots of cameras and lots of gear, so it doesn't matter as much to me. But if I was, maybe not in this industry, it'd be really, really nice to have that functionality. So currently you can do that. I'm assuming once the software gets updated, so they didn't release, specs or whatever. But it has this functionality in the menu. The X100V does not, but I'm hoping that they'll toss in a firmware update because having this as your little Zoom call camera would be pretty awesome. And then to kind of jump back into lenses, the lens on the X100V is the 23mm f2 lens, which again, you can purchase a 23mm f2 lens that obviously has different specs and everything. But the X100V has this pancake lens that's built into the body. It obviously doesn't come off. And then because of that, they were able to add a leaf shutter, which then means you can shoot at way higher shutter speeds for flash sync, but it also means that you feel a lot less. So when you actually pull this thing up and take a photo, I don't know if you can really hear it, but it is very quiet. And I don't know if I have a memory card in this or not, but when you take a photo on this, definitely sounds more like a camera. So we'll do like a quick 1-to-1 thing here. Trying to make it as close as possible. So X100V, X-E4. So not that big a deal, but it's one of those things where you don't really feel it. Yeah, you feel the lens moving to focus, but you don't feel the shutter going off with the leaf shutter. But you definitely feel the lens moving a little bit, and you definitely feel the shutter hit on the X-E4. It's still very mellow and very small and has a very classic sound. So it's not something that bothers me at all, but just kind of a heads up. And then sort of the most obvious, but the thing that is probably going to be the thing that people are thinking about the most is just the fact that, the X-E4 allows you to have interchangeable lenses, and the X100V is stuck with this same lens. The 35mm is a great, focal length equivalent, as this is a 23mm in this crop kind of sensor. But Fujifilm just has a vast array of other cameras and lenses that you can kind of adapt and interchange throughout. So, size-wise, performance-wise, they're all really, really similar. But if you are considering kind of expanding beyond and, maybe you're going to use this as a personal camera and you want to buy a longer lens for your kids' sports games, or buy a wider lens for filming yourself, or any of those other things, that's where I think the X-E4 makes a lot of sense, as, you have a lot of different options. And especially these little f2 lenses. This is the 35mm, which is kind of like a 50mm equivalent. They're great, relatively inexpensive, and you can pair any of these lenses with the X-E4 and get, a fairly compact, very lightweight setup for less than the X100V. And one of the other final things, if you are going out sort of in the elements, the X100V is kind of just an all-in-one package, obviously. And if you add the filter adapter and a filter of any kind, this can be a fully weather-sealed camera where I don't know what point is the thing that isn't weather-sealed. Maybe it's the lens mount, But the X-E4, I haven't seen anything about it being weather sealed. So even though the lenses, a lot of these are weather resistant, I guess I would have to not trust that this would be great in all weather conditions. So if you're planning on going out and just like using these in the rain and stuff like that, the X100V would probably be the better buy in that situation. So thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that answered some of your questions. I know I recently picked up the X100V as a personal camera, as the XE series just never was very exciting for me. But in the same way, the X100V kind of like upped the expectations for the X100 series, and I feel like 100% the X-E4 has done the same thing for the XE series. So honestly, they share so much of similar performance and specs that it's one of those things where you definitely can't go wrong with either of them. It's, do you love the 35mm perspective and do you want the smallest package? Grab this thing. If you want to maybe save a little bit of money and have the ability to expand your lens collection and things like that over time, go with the X-E4. Both are amazing cameras, and I highly recommend either of them. I'm honestly probably going to keep both around just so I have the flexibility to do both, and then I can hand off cameras to other people. And I'm also considering using this X-E4 as my kind of auxiliary camera for weddings, as something that I can put on wider focal lengths and longer focal lengths that it's a little bit more difficult for my Leica stuff to do. And then I'll still pack around the X100V as another kind of like backup camera and as a camera that's fully weather sealed. So that is just, there's lots of options and it's hard to choose, but hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight into both cameras. So thanks so much again, and I will see you on the next one.